The light rain falling over Newark that night felt like it was trying to wash the whole world clean, but nothing could lighten the weight. Marisol carried in her chest as she pushed her cheap suitcase across the airport floor. The zipper was already crooked, the handle stitched in a rush by a neighbor before the trip, and every step echoed like the ground was made of glass. The American cold slipped right through her thin jacket the moment the automatic doors opened, making her shiver. She'd never admit it to anyone, but right then she wished she hadn't come. It felt like the silence in that airport was screaming that she didn't belong in this country. With a trembling hand, she touched the spot where she'd hidden her $40 in improvised fold in her bra, her safest little vault. That was all she had. Money that seemed to evaporate just by thinking about it. The bus driver who would take her to the tiny shared studio in East Orange barely looked at her as he grabbed the crumpled bills. Marisol noticed the indifferent way he fed them into the machine, like they were dried leaves blowing in the wind. Nobody there knew that those $40 were the thin thread keeping her from absolute despair. The ride dragged on through wet streets, old buildings, and streetlights that flickered like they were tired. From the window, she watched cars rushing by as if everyone else had somewhere far more important to be. She thought of her mother, of the tired face she'd left behind, and felt a stab of guilt so deep it nearly stole her breath. She repeated to herself the promise she'd made. I'll come back for you. I'll come back with dignity. I'll come back different. But right then, curled up on that hard bus seat, it felt impossible to believe in any kind of future. The house she'd be staying in was even smaller than she imagined. A narrow hallway, dim lights, and a mix of food smells and expired cleaning products. The three women she'd be sharing a room with greeted her with shy smiles, as if they also carried the fresh memory of fear. Thin mattresses lined the floor, clothes hung from makeshift hangers, and a tiny window let in a freezing draft that cut straight to the bone. Marisol sat on the mattress they offered and realized she was so exhausted she could sleep anywhere, even if the rough fabric scratched her skin. That first night, the world felt way too big for her. The only thing breaking the silence was a distant siren, and Marisol lay there staring at the peeling ceiling. She wondered if she'd made the biggest mistake of her life. Wondered if she was strong enough to keep going. The truth was, for the first time in years, she didn't have an answer. The next days were just one closed door after another. She walked for hours looking for any job washing dishes, mopping floors, working in the hot back rooms of restaurants that treated her like she was disposable. Her broken English made some people cut her off before she even finished a sentence. Some laughed, others just pointed at the door. Every rejection hit her like a blow, leaving her smaller, more invisible, more desperate. At night, she'd come back with burning feet and heavy eyes, trying to hide from the other women how much she was hurting. One morning, while crossing the street, a car sped by and nearly hit her. The scare made her lose her balance, and she fell to her knees on the wet sidewalk. She tasted the asphalt cold dirty and felt her life collapsing all over again. People walked around her like she was just part of the scenery, just another immigrant trying to survive. And there, on her knees, Marisol finally cried. She cried for her mother, for the fear, for the loneliness, for the hunger starting to tighten, for the shame of not being able to stand up. She cried like she needed to empty her soul just to breathe again. But right there on that sidewalk, something shifted. An older Hispanic woman with gray hair and kind eyes walked up to her slowly. She reached out her hand without saying a word, just that hand small and steady. Marisol hesitated, but she took it. The woman helped her up and spoke in Spanish with a voice that felt like a hug. Mia, you're strong. You just forgot for a moment. Those simple words ran through Marisol like a spark. It was like someone finally saw her soar past the dirt from the fall and the fear hiding in her eyes. The woman walked with her to the corner and pointed at a small laundromat with a faded blue front. They need someone to help out. It doesn't pay much, but it's a start. Marisol looked at the place like someone staring at an unlikely harbor after a storm. Her heart beat different, not full of hope yet, but full of possibility. And in that tiny, almost invisible moment, something inside her settled again. She took a deep breath, wiped her face with her sleeve, and took her first step toward the laundromat. She had no idea yet, but that simple, silent gesture would mark the beginning of the biggest change of her life. It was the start of a path that would take her places she never imagined, places that would demand courage, tears, tough choices, and strength. But right then, standing in front of that fogged-up glass door, all she knew was that she had to try, and that alone was enough to keep her going, even without money. Even with fear. That was what pushed her forward. The bell over the door jingled when Marisol walked into the laundromat. The sharp smell of laundry detergent mixed with cheap fabric softener hit her all at once. There was a constant hum from the giant washing machines lined up like tired soldiers, spinning without pause. The floor was damp, marked by hurried footsteps and splashes of water. Behind the counter, a middle-aged man with a worn-out expression and glasses sliding down his nose looked up at her. "You need something?" he asked, already sounding impatient. Marisol felt her heart race. She swallowed hard, trying to remember the phrases she dare rehearsed in airhead. Work. Trabajo. She pointed at herself, then at the machines. I can. Clean, limpia, todo. Fold. Help. The man stared at her for a few seconds that felt like forever. He sighed, the kind of sigh that belonged to someone permanently annoyed at life. "You speak little English," she nodded, keeping her gaze steady. He scratched his head, looked around, and shrugged. "I need someone to clean, help with clothes, stay late. Cash, if you last, you stay. If not, there's others." There was no contract, no explanations, No training, just a cleaning rag, a pile of clothes, and the strange feeling that, for the first time since she'd arrived, someone had basically said, "I need you," even if it came out rough. He introduced himself as Mr. Harris and pointed at the overflowing baskets. Start today. Marisol worked like she was trying to prove to the world she deserved to breathe. She scrubbed the floors until her knees throbbed, picked up lost socks, untangled twisted sheets, folded clothes with almost reverent care. She knew what it was like to have nothing, so she treated every piece like it mattered. Those first days were a blur of physical exhaustion and quiet relief. She had somewhere to be, something to do, a few dollars at the end of the week. But relief came with new kinds of hurt. Mr. Harris rarely said please or thank you. He complained when she was slow, complained when the clothes weren't folded the right way, complained when she asked to leave a few minutes early to catch the last bus. Sometimes he spoke too fast for her to follow, and when she got confused, he'd shake his head, frustrated. "You people never learn," he muttered once, assuming she wouldn't understand. She didn't catch every word, but she understood the tone. It stung like an open wound. Still, Marisol watched everything. She noticed that people didn't just walk into the laundromat carrying baskets. They came in carrying hurry, carrying crying kids, carrying dark circles under their eyes, carrying expensive suits and exhausted expressions. She noticed how some housewives stood still, staring at the spinning machines like those minutes were their only break of the day. She studied clothing, labels, fabrics, the smells that clung to everything: expensive perfume, sweat, construction dust, cigarette smoke. Without realizing it, she was studying habits, routines, absences. One day, a woman dropped a freshly washed white blouse onto the wet floor. Distracted by her phone, she didn't even notice. Marisol saw it and moved on instinct. She picked it up gently, took it back to the sink, scrubbed away the new stains, rinsed it, wrung it out carefully, and hung it to drip. When the woman returned, confused because the blouse was gone, Marisol handed it to her clean, still damp. "You dropped." "I clean again," she said with a shy smile. The woman's eyes widened. "You did this. Thank you. Thank you so much. You're very careful." That sentence echoed in Marisol's mind for days. You're very careful. It was true. She always had been. With her words, with her money, with the people she loved. Nobody had ever told her that so clearly. It was like someone had just turned a light on inside her. Time passed, and she started recognizing some customers by name, even if she still struggled to pronounce them. She knew which man always forgot coins in his pockets, which lady liked her towels rolled, which mum brought in blankets smelling like sour milk, begging to get them cleaned. Little by little, without even meaning to, Marisol began reorganizing the space. She separated delicate clothes, came up with a way to group them by color, lined up finished orders with handwritten tags, each with a tiny symbol or a misspelled English word to remind herself who was who. Mr. Harris complained less. He didn't praise her, but he stopped hovering. "You're fast," he said once, dryly. To Marisol, it felt like a trophy. Even so, life was still harsh. Her paycheck barely covered the mattress she rented, the bus fare, and a little food. Many nights, dinner was stale bread and instant coffee. She counted her money like someone counting drops of water in the desert, doing the math to see if she could send anything home to her mother. Whenever she managed to send a few dollars, she recorded a voice message, crying softly, apologizing for it being so little. "I'll get more. Mama, please wait for me. Don't give up on me." The injustices came in waves. One afternoon, two men walked into the laundromat, shouting, laughing at her, mocking her accent when she asked them to put their clothes in the right bin. One of them made a cruel comment, something about illegal and go back to your country. She didn't understand every word, but she felt the venom in their eyes. She stood frozen for a few seconds, her heart pounding so hard it felt like it wanted to escape her chest. When they finally left, she locked herself in the bathroom. She stared into the mirror and saw the same fear she used to have as a little girl, hiding behind a door while adults argued, and right there, staring at her own reflection. A question began to bother her. What if I spend my whole life being treated like this? What if this is all the world thinks I deserve? The thought made her stomach twist. One particularly cold night, while they were closing the laundromat, Marisol watched Mr. Harris count the cash from the register. The bills stacked up, forming little piles. She knew every customer who had left that money behind. She knew how much work was tucked inside each basket. Suddenly, she realized the laundromat wasn't just a place where clothes were washed. It was a place where people dropped off something intimate, something tied to their bodies and their routines. Bedsheets they cried into, dresses from special nights, work uniforms. Everything passed through those machines, through those hands. That same week, a woman from her shared room asked if she knew how to properly wash dress shirts because her boss kept complaining about the creases. Marisol said she did. The woman brought a few shirts and left them on the mattress. "I'll pay you to do them better than the laundromat he uses. He complains a lot, but he pays well." Marisol stayed up all night washing, scrubbing by hand, ironing with the old iron they had, using a folded towel as a makeshift ironing board. When she finished, the shirts looked new again. She folded them carefully, smelling like soap and responsibility. When the woman returned, she ran her fingers over the perfect creases and let out a low whistle. "Girl, you work miracles. You should charge more." It was the first time Marisol earned money for something she had done entirely on her own terms. No orders, no yelling, no impatient sighs. The money was small, but different. It carried another kind of weight, proof of something she didn't yet know how to name: self-worth. At the laundromat, she kept working as always, but now with sharper eyes. She noticed details no one else cared about, how much people hated waiting around for machines, how angry they got when delicate fabrics were ruined, how much they trusted the few employees who remembered their names. She began imagining what a different kind of place could look like, somewhere clean, organized, with comforting smells, maybe even with hot coffee for customers who had to wait. The idea came and went like a reckless dream. Whenever it grew too loud, another voice cut it down. You barely speak English. You don't have papers, or money, or school. Who do you think you are? But all it took was one grateful customer, or one neighbor asking her to work her magic on a garment, and the first voice would return, persistent whispering, "You do this better than so many people." What if, one afternoon, while folding white sheets under the pale light of the late day, Marisol felt a strange chill? Not cold something else, but like an invisible thread had stretched out in front of her, connecting that simple moment to something bigger she didn't understand yet. She looked down at her calloused hands, at the perfectly aligned sheets, at the full basket waiting for her. For the first time since arriving in the United States, she didn't see herself only as a survivor. She saw a skilled worker, someone who had something real to offer. She took a deep breath, tucked that realization into a special corner of her soul, and went back to work. There was no music, no applause, no big revelation, just an immigrant folding clothes in an ordinary laundromat in New Jersey, while inside her, quietly, the seed of a future that would one day change her life was starting to grow. Dawn always crept in quietly for Marisol, like an old companion who never bothered to knock. It was the hour when the laundromat finally went silent, when the machines spun at a slower rhythm and the harsh white lights seemed to breathe with her. Over the past few months, she'd gotten used to staying late, not just for the extra cash, but because that silence gave her room to think. Thinking was dangerous, but inevitable. Thinking was where dreams started to take shape, even when the world kept trying to remind her she didn't have the right to dream at all. One of those late nights, while folding a pile of towels, she grabbed her old phone and started jotting down ideas in a messy mix of Portuguese and English: serviço, pick-up-y, special wash for delicate clothes, nice folding, good smell that client remembers. They were scattered notes, raw thoughts, but they warmed her chest with a shy kind of hope. She couldn't explain why she wrote them down. Maybe it was just her way of feeling alive in a country that kept trying to erase her. Little by little, her small side jobs started multiplying. A woman from her house asked her to wash her husband's uniforms. Then a friend of a friend needed someone to take care of delicate party dresses. Word began to spread. People said some Latina girl could turn tired clothes into flawless pieces. Every night she handed over a neatly organized bag full of clean, soft, beautifully folded clothes. Marisol felt like she was building something invisible but real. One Saturday morning, when the sun slipped timidly through the laundromat window, a young customer came up to the counter and asked if the careful lady was there. Marisol raised her hand gently. The girl explained, embarrassed, that she'd ruined an expensive blazer in her home machine. She held up the pea-scratched fabric, a strong smell of the wrong detergent. Marisol ran her hand over the material with the sensitivity of someone who knows what it's like to lose the little you own. She said she'd try to save it, but promised nothing. The girl nodded, discouraged. Marisol took the blazer home that night and treated it using techniques she'd learned as a child, watching her mother fix clothes so they could last one more year. She used warm water, vinegar, gentle soap, and slow, careful movements. She whispered a small prayer as she worked, as if asking destiny for permission to transform that garment. It took hours. When she finally finished, the blazer looked revived, not perfect, but worthy again. When the young woman picked it up, her eyes filled with tears. "My God, how did you do this?" she asked, stunned. Marisol only shrugged, shy. The girl insisted on paying more than agreed and, before leaving, said, "You're not just cleaning clothes, you're saving them." People would pay a lot for this. That sentence echoed inside Marisol for days. People would pay a lot for this. She whispered it to herself as she walked home, as she folded sheets, as she ate her lonely dinner of stale bread. It wasn't vanity, it was truth. She had a skill no one would ever notice if she stayed hidden behind the laundromat counter. But the world always found a way to remind her it was dangerous to feel too confident. One rainy afternoon, Marisol arrived a few minutes late. The bus had broken down and she'd walked nearly 20 blocks in the rain. She walked in drenched, hair plastered to her forehead, and before she could even explain, Mr. Harris snapped, "You think this is a game? You think you can come whenever you want?" She tried to speak, to explain, but he cut her off. "If you can't keep up, I get someone else. Plenty of people need this job. You're not special here." Those words, thrown with such coldness, hit her like a blow. It wasn't the first time he'd treated her that way, but that day it hurt more. Maybe because she was too tired. Maybe because deep down she was starting to believe she deserved something different. She cried silently while scrubbing the floor, and each tear felt like it was turning her pain into a quiet kind of furious something new she didn't know how to name. In the days that followed, her relationship with Mr. Harris only got worse. He seemed irritated by everything: the noise of the machines, the flow of customers, the simple fact that she existed. One day, when she placed the delicate clothes on a separate shelf, just as she'd always done, he changed his tone. "Don't change things without asking. You don't run this place." Marisol froze. The words echoed like a stone hitting glass. It wasn't what he said, it was what it revealed. In that place, she would never be more than an obedient shadow. That night, she got home later than usual. The cold felt like it was trying to slip into her bones. She sat on the thin mattress, hugged her knees, and stared at nothing. The other women slept, exhausted. The silence was so deep, she could hear her own heartbeat thumping in a strange rhythm, like it was trying to remind her of something forgotten. And then, suddenly, she understood. She had learned everything she needed from that place. She knew how it worked, how to organize it, how to treat customers. She knew far more than Mr. Harris would ever imagine. And she knew, most of all, that she couldn't spend the rest of her life there. The next day, a couple walked into the laundromat with big suitcases, travel clothes, and panic in their faces. They said they needed everything washed yesterday because the hotel had lost their laundry. Marisol jumped into action, sorted everything by fabric, treated tough stains, folded it all with almost artistic precision. The couple was blown away, took photos of the finished pieces, and asked if she had her own service. Marisol froze. She didn't, at least not officially. But in that instant, something inside her spoke louder than fear. Yes, I can do special service, she said, with the firmest voice she had ever heard come from herself. She grabbed a scrap of paper and wrote down her number. The couple left saying they tell their friends that they recommend her personal services. Marisol stood there, staring at the door as it closed. She felt something she hadn't felt since childhood: pride. When she closed the laundromat that night, the world seemed different. Not because everything had changed, but because she was changing. Slowly, quietly, like someone walking in the dark who, for the first time, senses something ahead of them besides walls. When she got home, she took a deep breath, opened her notebook, and wrote just 2 words: "My business." They were the boldest words she had ever allowed herself to write. But as she stared at them, something inside her, something small but steady, whispered that this was only the beginning. Winter hit hard that year, as if it wanted to test the endurance of people already living on the edge. For Marisol, it was just another reminder of how fragile everything she owned really was. The small savings tucked inside a folded envelope, the thin mattress on the floor, the phone with a cracked screen, the job that could disappear at any moment. But despite the biting cold, there was something new inside her, something burning with unexpected strength. It was the idea, still timid, still trembling, that maybe she could build something of her own. At the laundromat, she worked the same as always, but now with sharper, almost clinical eyes. She watched the busiest hours, the most profitable days, the services people requested the most. Every tiny detail that everyone else ignored became, to her, a piece of a silent puzzle. People wanted speed, care, and trust. And more than anything, they wanted someone who treated their clothes with the same attention they gave to their chaotic lives. One afternoon, while she organized a pile of shirts still warm from the dryer, she saw Mr. Harris arguing on the phone, his face red, his voice loud. Apparently, an important customer had complained about stains from a poorly done wash. He paced back and forth, flustered, sweating under the harsh lights. When he finally hung up, he shot an irritated look at Marisol, as if the mistake were hers. But she knew better. She knew exactly who had handled that batch, and for the first time she didn't lower her head. She held his gaze, calm and steady, until he looked away. That tiny act of resistance, almost invisible, gave her a strange strength, a courage that grew like a thin beam of light slipping through a closed window. That night, when she returned to the cramped room, she found a cardboard box under her mattress. The other women weren't there. Inside the box were clothes the neighbors had gathered too. Donate pieces that didn't fit anymore. Marisol found a wool coat torn at the shoulder, a turtleneck with stains, a dress that smelled like mildew. Most people would see trash. She saw possibility. She separated the pieces, treated the stains, stitched them with the tiny spool of thread she kept in a jar. She didn't stop until the sun started to rise. She had turned discarded clothes into beautiful, wearable pieces again. Suddenly, she realized she wasn't just cleaning clothes. She was restoring stories. And maybe that was her real talent. The next day, she brought 2 of those restored pieces to the laundromat just as a test. She hung them in a corner, like someone running a secret experiment. A customer walked over, touched the coat, and asked if it was for sale. Marisol froze for a second. The woman insisted, calling it a charming, vintage piece. On instinct, Marisol named a small price. The customer paid immediately. Marisol slipped the money into her apron pocket and rushed to the bathroom, where she took a deep breath, trying to control her emotions. It wasn't much, but it meant everything. Someone had bought something she had created with her own hands. That night, on the crowded bus, she wondered how far she could go if she had time, resources, space. But every time she dreamed too high, the same wave of fear came crashing back. What if someone found out? What if she got fired? What if everything fell apart? The fragility of her life followed her everywhere, a shadow reminding her how much she had to lose even if that everything was almost nothing. Still, demand for her side jobs kept growing. People talked, passed her number around. It was always the same. The careful girl, the Latina who saves clothes, the one who folds beautifully. And every new message felt like a reminder that there was something special. There's something she herself hadn't fully seen. With the money from those small jobs, she bought her first decent INA used one she found through an online ad. Then she managed to buy a tiny portable sewing machine for almost nothing. She smuggled everything into her room and spent nights sharpening her skills, testing stitches, experimenting with techniques. She had to muffle the machine's noise with blankets so she wouldn't wake anyone up. With each restored piece, she felt a quiet, intimate pride, almost a secret. But destiny, as always, found a way to test her. One Tuesday morning, when she arrived at the laundromat, she found Mr. Harris furious over a pile of clothes ruined by a new trainee. He was shouting, pacing, saying he didn't have time to save destroyed pieces. When Marisol approached, he pointed at the pile and demanded that she fix them. His eyes held a contempt that twisted her stomach. She picked up the first piece, a light blue shirt, thin fabric, now stained with disinfectant, felt a surge of silent indignation. not because of the task, but because of the way he spoke to her, as if she were disposable, as if she had no worth. Something inside Marisol snapped. She realized that as long as she stayed there, she would always be treated as someone without a voice, without a name, without a future. That night, alone in the laundromat with the machines spinning like a metallic choir, she made a decision that would change everything. She would start her own business, even if it was small, improvised, hidden. She'd already been doing it scattered here and there, but now it would be intentional. No more occasional favors. This would be a service, a brand, an identity. She started slowly. She created a simple name, Marisol Care, a name she thought sounded pretty, soft, full of care. She wrote it on little hand-cut papers, improvised flyers made with borrowed colored pens. She kept them in her pocket and discreetly handed them to customers she trusted. It wasn't grand, but it was real. It was hers. As weeks passed, messages started coming in faster than she could handle. Some people asked for specific services, others said they'd heard about her. One day, an American woman who owned a small boutique called and asked if Marisol handled delicate restorations. She had never done anything that fancy, but she said yes. The boutique sent 2 pieces of old silk. Marisol spent an entire weekend working on them, careful fingers, anxious breathing. When she returned them, the owner was impressed and recommended her to 3 friends. Meanwhile, Mr. Harris began to suspect something. He noticed the discreet smiles customers gave Marisol. The gratitude always directed at her. The way some asked if she offered special services. Instead of recognizing her value, he grew irritated. He treated her even more harshly, making her clean the same spot twice, giving contradictory orders, criticizing work that was flawless. She stayed quiet, but something inside her kept growing, not anger, but certainty. The certainty that she no longer belonged there. One windy afternoon, while she folded a row of white sheets under the pale evening light, she received an unexpected message. An elderly woman from an upscale neighborhood, referred by the boutique, wanted to hire her weekly. The offer was double what she earned at the laundromat. Marisol's whole body trembled like she'd been shocked. She read the message 10 times. Life was offering her a chance. Small, but real. She looked around the laundromat, the tired machines, the scratched counter, Mr. Harris's cold stare that passed right through her as if she weren't there. She looked at her hands marked by soap and work, and she understood with painful clarity that the moment had come. She took a deep breath, put her phone in her pocket, and for the first time since arriving in the United States, she prepared to do something she never imagined she'd be brave enough to do: choose herself. The next morning, the sky looked like a giant sheet of gray cotton stretched over New Jersey. A light, lazy snow drifted down, landing on Marisol's hair as she walked toward the laundromat. Each step felt heavy, not from exhaustion, but from the decision she carried in her chest, a decision still trembling between fear and courage. The cold wind slapped her face, but something warm burned inside her, like her own body was trying to shield her from doubt. When she opened the shop door, the bell chimed as usual, but this time the sound felt like it was announcing the end of a chapter. Mr. Harris was behind the counter, complaining about something on the computer. He didn't even look up. The machines spun in their usual dull rhythm, as if unaware that something was about to happen with more force than all their motors combined. Marisol hung her coat slowly, searching for courage in the deepest part of her breath. This was it. If she didn't act now, she'd lose herself all over again. She inhaled, walked to the counter. "Mr. Harris, I need talk," she said, her English broken but steady. He didn't lift his head. "Whatever it is, make it fast. Busy day." Her stomach tensed, but she continued. I go. No more work here. I start my business." The sentence came out awkward, imperfect yet whole. Mr. Harris finally lifted his eyes, surprised. Then he laughed, a dry, mocking laugh, so bitter it nearly made her collapse for a second. "Your business, you," he scoffed. "Don't be ridiculous. You don't know this country. You don't even speak the language right. People like you don't start businesses. People like you clean for people who start businesses." For a moment, the world went silent. Those were the exact words she'd feared her whole life. Words that had echoed inside her for years even when no one said them aloud. Words that made her believe her place in the world was to stay invisible. The air grew heavy, her vision blurred. But in the middle of that storm, a memory surfaced, the first customer who praised her care. The boutique that trusted her hands. The clothes she'd rescued, the handwritten flyers, the messages on her phone. Her mother miles away, saying in a tired voice, "You were born for more, daughter." And for the first time in her life, she believed it. "People like me," she repeated slowly, savoring each syllable. "People like me work harder. People like me survive. People like me don't give up." Mr. Harris frowned, irritated by her boldness. But Marisol wasn't afraid of him anymore. "Thank you for Job," she said simply, "but agora eu vou seguir meu caminho." And before he could speak, she took off her apron, folded it neatly, and set it on the counter. She walked to the door, her legs trembling, but she didn't stop. The bell chimed again this time. It sounded like freedom. The beginning wasn't glamorous. Far from it. Marisol turned part of her shared bedroom into a tiny workshop. The other women rolled their eyes, saying it would never work, but soon fell silent when they saw the steady flow of clients, the bags coming in and out, the non-stop notifications on her phone. She balanced everything, washing, ironing, restoring, carrying orders on crowded buses, delivering 2 fancy building lobbies with a shy smile that hid how exhausted she was. Every dollar she earned went into an envelope she guarded like a treasure. It was her future wrapped in paper. In a few months, she managed to rent a room of her own tinny, but hers. She worked there sewing until dawn while the neighbor blasted loud music and the pipes clanked in the walls. None of it mattered. With every new client, she felt she was building something real, something no document, language barrier or border could take from her. Her reputation grew almost organically. People talked about her care, her punctuality, her rare ability to save clothes others would throw away. In 1 year, she had clients across 3 different cities. In 2, she rented a small commercial space, cramped and cheap, but clean, bright, and smelling lightly of lavender. She painted the wall a soft blue that reminded her of childhood and hung a simple sign, Marisol Care, Restoration, Laundry and Premium Garment Care. On opening day, there was no ribbon cutting, no party, just her, alone, taking a deep breath before turning the key for the first time. The tears hit without warning, hot, overwhelming. She cried for everything. For the pain, the rejections, the hunger, the nights she stitched with aching fingers. She cried for her mother, for her hard childhood, for the country that almost swallowed her whole, but was now watching her rise. And she cried most of all for herself, for the version of her who once fell to her knees on a wet sidewalk, unsure if she could keep going. If she could, she would hug that past Marisol and whisper, "One day you'll win in ways you can't even imagine." Years passed, and what began as a scattered side job turned into a quiet empire. Marisol opened 3 stores, then 5, then a whole network specializing in high-end restoration and textile care. She imported modern machines, trained employees, immigrant women like her, many invisible to the world, and created programs so they could learn English and business skills. None of them would earn less than they deserved. None of them would be treated the way she once was. When the company account hit its first million, she didn't celebrate with champagne or vacations. She grabbed her phone and called her mother, who answered with a trembling voice, weaker from years of struggle. "Mama, Marisol Said, crying, Edith Italiano." "I finally did it. I always knew you would," her mother replied with a smile she could feel through the phone. "Because people like you never give up." One quiet afternoon, years later, Marisol returned to the neighborhood where everything began. She walked to the old house where she'd shared that freezing room with other women. The window was still crooked. The hallway still smelled like food and cheap disinfectant. She touched the door gently, like touching a ghost, whispered, "Thank you," as if thanking her own past. Then she passed the laundromat where she once folded sheets until her fingers ached. The neon was off, the front was worn down, the sign hung crooked. The place looked small, sad, almost irrelevant. She smiled without arrogance, just understanding. That place had been the beginning, harsh, cruel, necessary, the cradle of her rebirth. As she walked back to her car, a soft breeze lifted her hair. The sky was turning orange, and for a moment everything felt silent, perfect, whole. Marisol breathed deeply, feeling her entire life fit inside her chest. She had arrived in America with 40 crumpled dollars and a tired heart, and now she walked those same streets as a woman who had defied statistics, poverty, prejudice, fear. A woman who had turned pain into work, work into skill, and skill into a future. She had rewritten her fate, and deep down she knew other women would do the same big. When one immigrant rises, she clears the path for all the ones who will come after. The end.